Welcome to the home church in Bronathan and to this part of our service where we share what has helped us in our relationship with the divine. I'm going to share from Psalm 67, and I invite you to also share your responses to what I say or anything else that has helped you in your relationship with the divine by emailing or by writing your comments under the YouTube video or on our Facebook page, just to share in building up and co-creating our time of worship together. So let me start by reading Psalm 67, and I'm reading in the Inclusive Bible translation. O God, show us kindness and bless us, and make your face smile on us. For then the earth will acknowledge your ways, and all the nations will know of your power to save. Let the peoples praise you, O God, let all the peoples praise you. Let the nations shout and sing for joy, for you dispense true justice to the world. You guide the nations of the earth. Let the peoples shout and sing for joy, let all the peoples praise you. The land has given its harvest. God, our God, has blessed us. May God bless us, and may God be revered even to the ends of the earth. Amen. The part of this psalm that got my attention as I read it and reflected on it was in verse 4. Let the nations shout and sing for joy, for you dispense true justice to the world. You guide the nations of the earth. And particularly the phrase, you dispense true justice to the world, got my attention this time. As usual, I turn to my Swedenborgian resources as I reflect not only on how that verse has impacted me, but on perhaps other perspectives that I can find. And so the first place I turn is the Kempton Project, which is a literal translation of the Bible, trying to get very close to the original Hebrew and Greek words. And so for this one, the phrase is, for judge people uprightness. I noticed that judge is used here, and I noticed in the various English translations that I was looking at and comparing, about half of them say judgment or judge, and half use the word justice. And so judgment and justice apply, I would say, probably equally in understanding this phrase. This translation that I read uses justice, and that's what got my attention, was the justice portion of that. Justice tends to be more about love and coming from the heart. Judgment is perhaps more remote, is a little bit more about thinking and sort of critical evaluation. But the uprightness and the equality of it is just as much relevant to justice and to judgment. The small work, Prophets and Psalms, number 317, gives a summary of the internal or spiritual meaning of this psalm, of this part of the psalm, and that is, the whole church will acknowledge and worship the divine from joy of heart. And so when I personalize that a little bit, I understand it to mean that part in me, the church in me, the part that receives the divine, that sacred part where I am in closest relationship with the divine, acknowledges and worships the divine from joy of heart. It's a very joyful response to feeling the presence of the divine. Now, when I looked in Swedenborg for perhaps clues to what the internal or spiritual meaning of verse 4 about dispensing true justice might be, I couldn't find anything directly, but indirectly, an explanation about Exodus 23:6 has definite application. So Exodus 23:6 says, do not deprive the poor of justice. Arcana 9260 explains 23:6 in Exodus, and it starts with another translation of that phrase. And here's the Arcana. You shall not turn aside the judgment of your needy one in his dispute. Means not destroying the small amount of truth with those lacking in knowledge. This is clear from the meaning of the judgment as that which is upright and true, and from the meaning of needy one, as those who have only a small amount of truth owing to lack of knowledge, and still have a desire to receive instruction. I'm not exactly sure who the people are that have only a small amount of truth from lack of knowledge, but still have a desire to receive instruction. Some people that come to mind might be people who are living in a culture that is not really deeply steeped in a religious tradition or in spirituality, and so have some confusing messages in their culture about what is upright and true. It could be people who've just not received enough biblical or sacred text instruction in their communities of faith. People who've received sort of instruction and teaching that is not helpful. And it could be all of us rushing through our days, not thinking deeply about what is true and upright. So, reflecting on the psalm, the whole psalm, 67, gives many reasons for praising the divine. Reasons like the kindness and the blessing and the saving and the guiding and the harvest which the divine freely gives. The phrase about justice stood out to me in this pandemic time because of the apparent injustice in who contracts COVID-19 and who dies from it, both in the US and globally. Apart from elderly people who have comorbidities and other frail people who are always at risk for infection and death, those who are disproportionately affected are people of color, people who are living in poverty, people in low-paying but essential jobs that involve working closely with the public or involve going into people's homes, people who are living with poor air quality, which the closer you get to the center city, to urban areas, the more that you suffer from low air quality. People who have trouble accessing medical care, whether that's from working part-time and not having insurance, whether that's from poverty and not being caught really in the safety nets. Whatever the reason, people who have difficulty accessing medical care thus have comorbidities because without good medical care, other conditions like diabetes and hypertension and obesity can rage out of control without being carefully controlled or managed. And people who have to choose between income and health. People who are low income and so need to work to be able to support their family through the pandemic. People whose situation is such that there's no one else to provide. People who cannot retreat to the comfort of their home and work from home, and so have to work by going out and exposing themselves to other people. The situation that we're in with this pandemic raises up injustice in healthcare, but it also just raises up in general the injustice of wealth and poverty in the United States and globally. It's very apparent recently, but this problem is always with us. Yet the psalm assures us that the Divine One dispenses true justice in the world. But it's clear to me that we humans don't do that. We do not dispense true justice in the world. We're not always doing a good job of living up to what the divine is asking us to do. I don't blame the divine at all for the injustice that I see. I blame us human beings. But even so, I wince when I hear that phrase, dispensing true justice, because I see the potential for possibly blaming the divine for the injustice that's around us, for believing that the divine is not truly good and the divine is not truly trying to bless. And I see it as a way to scapegoat the divine rather than to face up to where we are failing as a human family. Instead, I tend to hear this phrase, when I get through the wincing bit, as a call to justice. to help make a change so that the divine's true justice is apparent in the world. I've got to say, during this pandemic time, it has really felt good that I've been able to work with my son John in donating food to the local people in financial difficulties because of the pandemic. It has been really a great experience, and I wonder, how will I continue to respond to this call to justice when I go back to work and to my busy life? It's not exactly clear to me, but I do believe that this call for justice has deepened within me. One way I can do that is to apply the message that's given in Exodus 23:6. Do not deprive the poor of justice. The Arcana number helped me to see spiritually that dispensing true justice means spreading what is upright and true, especially to people who lack knowledge but want to learn. How can I do that? I can do that by my example. I can do that by advocacy. I can do that by following in some measure Anna Woofenden's example in her newly released book, This is God's Table, which I'm reading, which I find very inspiring. And I've known Anna's story before, but reading it, and especially in this time of pandemic and injustice awareness, is really touching me. So when I look within me at the meaning of this Exodus 23:6 and Psalm 67:4, I can see that the Divine One is guiding me. In prophets and Psalms, the phrase is the whole church, and in Psalm 67, the phrase is the nations. But the nations in me, the church in me, that is what the Divine is guiding, to what is upright and true from the Divine, especially in those places where I am blocked from really knowing, especially guiding me where I am blinded by my self-interest, whether willfully or not, especially to those places where my belief in my apparent autonomy is getting in the way. My unknowing within is never deprived. I am always being guided. I'm always receiving true justice, whether or not I'm aware of it. There are always those nudges and that guidance to what is upright and true. And so I circle back to the health risk injustice that was triggered, or awareness of that was triggered again by Psalm 67:4. The Divine intends to guide us, all of us, to upright and truly just ways of blessing everyone, even in those places which we prefer to not know, even in those places where we are blinded by our self-interest, even when we believe that prosperity belongs to those who acquire it through their own efforts, and indirectly or directly are blaming people who are living in poverty and who have poor health, because we can blame them for what they've done or what they haven't done. The Divine is guiding us to be a blessing and to give blessing through truth and justice and uprightness in all of those situations, whether those situations are within or whether those situations are around us socially. And so I hear this call to justice, and I'm encouraged that I can do something in the way of justice, in the way of spreading true justice, socially and within me. Thank you for listening to what I have to share, and as I said, please share in whatever way you can what has affected you. But now I invite you to join me in prayer. Pray with me. Divine One, you have given us this call to justice by assuring us that you are dispensing true justice in the world around us and in the world within us. Help us to be open to your guidance so that we can be true and just in our thinking and in what we love and how we behave, and that we can spread your truth and justice and uprightness in the world around us. Continue to bless those who are involved in that work in all the ways that they are, and continue to bless those who receive the generosity, that can help to alleviate injustice in this world. Divine One, we pray for healing. Divine One, we pray for your wisdom. Amen. And now please join me in the prayer that Jesus taught us. Our Father, who's in the heavens, holy is your name. May your kingdom come and your will be done as in heaven, so upon the earth. Give us this day our daily bread. And forgive us our debts, as we also forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For yours is the kingdom and power and glory forever. Amen. And now grace to you and peace from the one who is, and who was, and who is to come. Amen.